Right. So today we're going to kind of link in our coaching with some chat around like physical development. So building on from strong landings, staying injury free. So joining me today, we have Julie Snow, Rose's physio. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to use this opportunity for you to highlight kind of some of the things that you've been working on, some of the things that are kind of part of your everyday job, to take this opportunity to kind of, I guess, bring them into focus, bring them into awareness for the coaches, and maybe talk about some of the practical things that coaches can do in their sessions if they aren't fortunate enough to have someone like you at their sessions. So we'll go straight into a little bit of an introduction around what your job is and maybe a bit about how you got to be Rose's physio.
Okay, so my primary role, and only full-time role, is to be the physiotherapist for the Roses senior squad. So the athletes that are contracted year on year fall under my care. And we look after them in their camps and competitions. So making sure they're ready to train, looking at all their individual differences and strengths and trying to make them best athletes they can be with their programming, alongside the strength and conditioning, sports scientist, nutritionist, all of those in the sports science medicine team. And we support them through all those camps and competitions. And then for the other half of the year, when they're with their clubs, we still support those athletes. So tend to go and visit the clubs and drop in and try and support the teams and their backroom staff, as well as when we do pick up injuries, as can happen, making sure that the Roses athletes are still being catered for, just because it can get quite busy when you're looking after a squad. If you get one or two injuries, or you're still trying to keep your training squad fighting fit for your week-on-week games, we just go and facilitate and support as best we can in the club environments as well. So that's my current role. And then came to this role about 7 years ago, but before that I was predominantly in rugby, men's and women's rugby, some sevens, some 15s. And before that, a long, long time ago, a little bit of time in the NHS, but always really wanted to get into sports physiotherapy and had a musculoskeletal focus. And I blame my dad for that entirely, growing up playing sports and watching him play sports all the time.
Nice. I bet there was some brutal injuries in rugby.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of everything, actually. I probably didn't plan it this way, but in rugby you can get anything and everything, and it's lots of big trauma, hits and injuries, shoulders, legs, knees, ankles, concussions, the works, soft tissue, bony, all of that type of stuff. And then actually coming into netball, it's actually honed my skills more into lower limb injuries predominantly. So without even trying, really, I've become a bit more of a specialist in knees and ankles in particular.
Nice. And I guess the important things that are on my mind to think about. So this is not doing you a disservice, but I think it's fair to say that if we've got limited knowledge of like physiotherapy, and especially like working in sport and especially as a coach, our perception of that wrongly could just be around like fixing problems. So putting a plaster on things, having a nice massage.
As the classic one.
Yeah. But actually a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about and some stuff that you described there is also about like injury prevention. It's also about kind of like, being strong. So you supporting them to kind of return from injury or prevent injuries, kind of, maximizing that individual kind of physical capability.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in physio that people sort of don't realise happens, and musculoskeletal physio is only one of the three cores when you train, and then sports itself is like 2% of that anyway. So it's quite a privilege to be in the position that I'm in, but it certainly doesn't encompass all that physiotherapists can manage and help with in an elite sporting environment. It's exactly that. We're trying to help the athletes develop and be at their best all the times and keep them out there and keep them available. But so it's not just the aftercare that we manage in the injury rehab, it's the prehab, and also trying to get the best out of people, whether that's trying to work out some asymmetries and make someone more symmetrical, whether it's trying to pull up some weaknesses and turn them around into strengths, whether it's just making something that you're already really good at a little bit better. A couple of like delving into those 1-2% changes that you can do.
Make the difference, don't they? Well, remember that word prehab. I think we'll come back to that later. But I guess this question is important because a lot of people out there will be, coaches who are watching. They might be really fortunate to have a physio or have a connection with a physio. So I just wanted to kind of explore with you around obviously the coaches that you work with. So you work closely with the Roses coaches, obviously, and then you mentioned stuff around like the Super League season. So you'll have a connection with those guys, those head coaches and assistant coaches as well. Can you just talk to us about the importance of like building good relationships with those coaches? Like, why is it important, and how you make sure that you're aligned on like that player care?
Definitely. I think it's probably critical in most relationships in any walk of life or work environment, but communication is probably one of the biggest reasons that you need and get connection with the coaches. And it's almost a triangular space, really, because my relationship with the coaches also centres around the athlete's relationship as well. So between the three, that creates the layers of that communication chain, and making sure that we're all on the same page and we're understanding the journey that we're going on, that athlete is going on, what the aims and progressions might be, what the end point is, everyone understanding which week that might fall in, what might change, what might fluctuate. So communication is going to be really key in that space, for everyone to buy in, understand, be on board. Sometimes that's with the clubs, that's about who's leading on that, how we best facilitate, what facilities we can access, how often we can get contact points with the athletes and the coaching team themselves. There's a bit of a mixture between full-time and part-time roles across the clubs as well. So again, just stepping in and making sure that we're supporting the athlete, but then that everyone else is in the know and that cascades down through the chain.
Yeah. And I think we often talk about the importance of like over communicating, don't we? And just making sure that like the players at the centre. I think you talked about a triangle, the players at the centre of that, and then everything else around them is almost a constant flow of over communication to make sure that we're all kind of championing that athlete either being back on court or kind of progressing, making sure that they're still physically able to put out what they want to put out.
Absolutely. And I think in the medical world as well, you can flip between things that are really black and white and things that you're living in the grey. So again, that over communication and people understanding risk profiles versus where there's opportunities, I think are really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's talk about why physical development matters. So the ideal scenario is you don't have any players on your table, your bed, yeah?
Ideally.
Ideally.
That's an easier day.
Let's get Snowy not busy. No players on your physio bed. Right, so therefore, like, why is strong physical development important, especially things? So if we kind of stick to netball, if we recognise things like jumping, landing, and why is that really important for netballers at all levels of the game?
Well, netball's quite unique in some of the skills that it challenges its players and competitors to do. It's got lots of multi-direction challenge. It's got need for attacking evasive movers versus reactive defensive maneuvers. And within that, you're doing short, sharp bursts of running and stopping, jumping, leaping. You go leap from one leg to another, whereas classically people would jump 2 feet, or staying on the same foot. And that's in a really abrupt deceleration and stop. And those physical qualities and the need and the demand to do that puts a lot of stress and strain through the body. So being physically fit and able to do that is not just the practice of that skill in particular when you're out there training the sport. If you can strengthen your muscles around your joints and stabilize around your joints, you're going to be able to better tolerate the demand of those tasks and perform them better more regularly.
So I guess, what I'm hearing there is like much different to any of the other sports, kind of like that. There's just a lot going on, isn't there? And I think what if we could add to that, like when I stopped playing football, I've been playing football for many, many years. My first game of netball, I've never felt pain in my joints like it, ever.
Yeah.
It was so painful. Like, I don't think my hips, my knees, any of those joints had experienced jumping and landing and turning on a hard surface like that before. I could not believe it.
Yeah, so you mentioned why it's important for anyone of any age. There's, again, depending on how old you are, what standard you're playing at, there's a number of different surfaces that people play the sport on, and obviously to a lot of different skill levels. So the demand going through your joints for impact is so much more than just running on grass, which for half the year in this country is a bit squishier, let's be honest, rather than a hard surface. So that's getting some shock absorption. So unless you are playing more regularly on the sprung courts, but still a hard surface, even though it's got a bit of spring, the impact and the momentum of running and trying to stop dead, then yeah, that is going to impact your joints. So you're right. I'm not surprised if we wake up the next morning a bit stiff.
I don't care for the connection you made with my age then to that, to be fair. But important because actually when we do think about other stuff like people getting back to netball, like walking netball and things like that, like there are lots of people who might have a really good history of like other sports that they've done, like me when I played football, or they might not. So actually taking into account like someone's playing history and the surfaces that they played on, what that looks like, is an important part of kind of I had no thought process of that whatsoever. Went to play netball, I was in a world of pain, and I didn't understand why until I'd really thought about the physical demands on my body and how they were different from before.
That became quite apparent for a lot of people during the COVID era when they couldn't access their gyms or their normal netball teams and their sports facilities, and they all started being 5K runners, avid 5K runners, and then all of a sudden, shins started aching, knees started aching, hips started aching, and people kind of realised the demand of running was challenging their body in a different way. So even though you might have been physically fit and doing lots of sports and activities, the change in activity can be something you need to be aware of in itself and perhaps try and do something about to better prepare your body for.
Yeah, I'm not about that. I literally was thinking about going back to parkrun this week and then remembered the world of pain it is the next day to get on and off the toilet. So I decided I wasn't going to do that this week anyway. So I guess another kind of like thing that we might factor in to kind of just explore before we move on is netball is predominantly a female sport. And are there any additional thoughts or additional things that you definitely have to think about that we might bring to coaches' awareness that are because we're dealing with females in our sport?
I think research into women in sport in particular is developing all the time. It's way behind and slowly catching up. But there seems to be a real sort of investment in women's sport and therefore the research into women's sport and female athletes right now. So we're understanding more and more as time goes on. There's no hard and fast evidence right now that being a woman means you can't do things and you shouldn't do things. But it's certainly giving people that information and access to that information just empowers someone to be more aware of their own body. And depending on if you're doing something as an individual or you're joining a team sport, you can just bring that into that space and just help you probably best manage yourself. It's tricky in team sports with regards to things like your menstrual cycle and how that can affect you personally, because we know there's a broad spectrum of symptoms and how people can feel and react during that time frame. But if you start understanding yourself more in that space, you can make better decisions as to whether you feel up to the physical demand of a training session and or game. And whilst that's quite tricky in team environments to, if you're ringing up your best mate and saying, I can't play this week, I've got tailbone cramps, then that's fair enough. That might just be your situation, but at least you can better understand if there is something you can do further down the line, if there's better ways you can help manage so that you're not missing out on sport, so that you can carry on to the best of your ability. And again, I think starting to have those conversations really openly has been really healthy. I come from a background of male dominated sport, so it was definitely not something that people worried about in my first jobs in professional sport. But it's really refreshing actually to be surrounded by women that are quite comfortable talking about their monthly cycles and how it's affecting them and how they're managing it. And we are starting to see a few trends with a few people, and people can be a little bit more sensitized and a little bit more acutely aware of aches and pains during that time frame, but it's not stopping them train. We're obviously tracking it against injuries and profiles like that, but doing our best to mitigate against any of those things, and touch wood, hopefully not seeing too many direct links. But it's just really healthy that people are having those conversations, and I think a lot of that information is available on Netball Her. So again, that's just broadened that conversation even wider, which is really nice to see.
Yeah, I think it's important that you kind of like highlight that. I think we are seeing a shift to people being a little bit more open. You mentioned like, working in other male dominated sports. I was thinking like I've never actually been coached by a female, and so not once in my life when I was playing sports would I have ever gone, yeah, sorry, I'm on my period and like I'm not sure that I can train as well today, because more so when I was younger, was so clumsy when I was on my period. And I felt like I couldn't even run in a straight line at times. And I often got very paranoid about that because I'd be like, oh, I feel like last week I was really good in training and this week I look like I don't even know what I'm doing. So I think if I'd have had, but to be fair, I don't know if I would have had the confidence to talk about it because it wasn't in my awareness of that probably was a factor. So I think there's lots of information now that's out there that brings that to people's awareness, gives the athlete confidence, kind of open up. And we're so fortunate that we've got a lot of like a really good network of like female coaches that I'm hoping would be really understanding of like those experiences of what people are, might be going through in terms of like training. And I think definitely like we all have that moment where like, oh, can't be bothered to go to training. We don't feel great, might feel bloated, but actually going out there and training and doing something generally always makes us feel a little bit better, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that people generally feel better for having done something, but I think you're right. It's just having that understanding of why you're not PBing in the gym week on week or always at your peak and always at your best.
I might use my period as an excuse for not PBing in the gym.
Yeah.
I don't know if we skipped over it, but might just go back to it. Is netball like you mentioned things in rugby? Is netball prime for like more injuries in certain places, or is it kind of not unique in that way?
So, as I've kind of said, coming into netball, it's kind of turned me into a bit of a lower limb specialist. So, statistically, I think if you were to generally ask people in the room, they would presume that ankles are the biggest culprit, and probably in recreational environments and the youth systems, ankle sprains are probably up there with one of the most frequent injuries that people will sustain. And again, that's that changing of direction and stability on landing, challenging the ankle ligaments, and particularly when girls are growing up. Having growth spurts, we see that in boys and girls as well. When the growth spurts happen, things can just be a little bit less coordinated and not quite as strong at that point in time. So you're probably a little bit more vulnerable in a couple of moments with certain tasks. So ankles, definitely. I think as you get a little bit older and maybe the style of game changes or the intensity of game changes and potentially standard of game when you're playing with more senior people around you, we tend to see in our netball systems more knee injuries. And they can range from the big traumatic ones, which is the classic one that you hear in the news all the time, your ACL ruptures and the big ligament ruptures around your knees, to that effect of impact over time, to some more sort of chronic joint aches and pains, and that result of impact and landing and twist and shear through the knee. So knees and ankles definitely higher on the list than most other things if you were to compare to rugby, football.
Yeah, which is not, I guess, and like football, you would also see knee, you would also see like ankle, things like that.
Well, I think in rugby and football, you see a lot of musculoskeletal stuff focused around soft tissues. So you'd see hamstring strains, quad strains, calf tears, things like that. They are starting to become a little bit more present in the top levels of the game in netball, which is just the demonstration that it's becoming more explosive, more powerful. Our athletes are getting stronger and fitter and putting their bodies under more challenge, and that's something that obviously we've got to work with and make sure that they can cope with, to remain available and not pick up those injuries. But classically you'd get a lot more soft tissue injuries in football, rugby, whereas netball, it tends to be centered more around the joints and the stability around the joints.
So let's talk about what we're going to do to try and make our athletes, our B netballers, our back to netballers like me, how are we going to make sure that kind of I guess there's different elements, right? So I'd like to think with the young ones, like our B netballers, that kind of activities, a lot of that is around setting foundations for being like really strong, like physical foundations for that development of movement skills, if you like. So we're kind of embedding that. But then I think there's also an element of like education around kind of like physical development that maybe some people haven't had, or maybe people like me who are switching sports and or played netball when they're at school, have taken a long time out and then they're coming back to netball. So kind of what stuff do you like recommend?
So this kind of was born from information around our injuries to start off with, and seeing the burden that we have from knee injuries, that it's high frequency in occurrence and often injuries that people miss out on playing for quite a substantial amount of time. So obviously, how and what can we do to reduce all of that? And it was across the board in kind of all the age groups. So it was standing out. And I think it's a sport predominantly played by women, and historically, culturally, girls, as you grow up, you're not necessarily encouraged to play as much on the playgrounds, be as physical, play as many sports. So if you do manage to stay in sport and you're playing netball, that's great. But you kind of grow up playing netball and doing lots of netball. And I think that in some ways can kind of limit some of your movement variety and capacity. And if no one's really training you in athletic movement skills either at the same time, so you're not going to a gym or you're not getting any kind of coaching support for how you move aside from learning your netball skills, then you're putting yourself probably at a little bit more risk as you get older and developing habits or asymmetries and those weaknesses that we talked about that can lead to some of the difficulties with landing and controlling those deceleration forces. So we scratched our heads for a few days and decided that we would take on a bit of an initiative that is designed to be a progressive program for anyone, any age, any stage, no matter whether you've played netball for 20 years or 2 weeks, you can take part in, and it will hopefully help you learn some landing skills from a real basic start point, and it will progress you all the way up to something that probably just looks and feels much more like a classic netball drill with ball in hand, like you would do in a classic warm-up. But we know that if you practice jumping and landing at least twice a week, you will inevitably get better at that skill set. So we've worked on that basis to create this graduated program where you can pick it up, follow it yourself, do it twice a week is the intention. It's not a warm-up in itself, but you can do it as part of your warm-up, so it shouldn't take you too long. You don't necessarily need any additional kit. You can either film yourself on your phone or your teammates can help you score your movement quality. And if you score well, you progress to the next level. And then you just keep going and the challenges get harder. And therefore you're progressing your skill set and the variability of your skill set, as well as checking in that you're actually producing quality movement as you get better through the stages. If you get a bit stuck, you just kind of stay at that stage. And if you really get stuck, then maybe that's a time that you could seek some additional help from a physio, a strength and conditioning coach or a netball coach, just to help you work on what you might need to strengthen to get better and carry on progressing.
So what you're talking about there is jump high, land strong, which is, like you said, something that I think a few of you kind of worked on, kind of putting that. I think what's really good about it is it's something that like you said, I can do it on my own. And I think that's what makes it really like usable. I think from a coaching perspective as well, it means that a coach can kind of go on, look at it. I definitely see some of the movements on there, like people are using in warm-ups and things, kind of like that little jump with a little push and a land or something like that. So if you've got a partner, it's not literally push and let's see if they land, but it's just a kind of little kind of nudge and kind of like, let's just see if that little rock, if you're ready, if you're prepared for that. So I definitely see like in netball warm-ups that people are replicating some sorts of those actions. I guess the other parts of it are, it is also about like there is a leveled approach to it, right, like you said, and some of that is, it's not really important, is it, like how long you stay on something. So if you're good at it, your score's all right, you could still stay on it until you're better rather than kind of moving on.
So there are 3 levels and there are 5 stages in each level. So if you're the best athlete in the world and move really well, the intention is that everyone starts at level 1, session A. And if you do it really well at the end of that week, you move on. So if you're really, really good, you've got 15 weeks worth of content there to progress through. And the likelihood is that people will stop and have to challenge themselves for a few weeks at the same stage. And then you can move on. So again, from a content point of view and a progressive point of view, there's lots for people to work on and build on progressively. And it's all fairly easy to follow. You're right, people are already doing it in their warm-ups, but this is about the frequency that you're doing it and the movement intent that you have, checking in with that quality of your jump and your land to know that you're really doing it well, to help train good habits through your body. And we're not going to get perfection, and that's absolutely fine, but the body needs to have good symmetry, good capacity to control these movements, and also just some exposure to variety so that when you are focused on the ball and getting free and your teammates and defending, you can trust that you're legs underneath you are going to be doing what you need them to do to keep you upright and hopefully not on my physio bed.
Top plan. Do any of them involve a ball, or is it all about kind of like just the movement?
It starts off with the real basics. So predominantly starts off with double leg tasks, and without a ball, because bringing the ball in is a bit of a distraction. But so you progress up from double leg to single leg, from forward to lateral, and then multi directions, and then also bringing a ball in. And as you go up through the stages, as I said, it will start to look and feel a little bit more like some of those classic things you might do in a warm up already. And that's not to say you shouldn't be doing them, but like I say, we're just trying to train something with a bit of a slightly higher frequency and a more quality intent on your movement, so that we're educating people on good landing skills, so that in those real moments when you're coming down from your massive leap, the flying intercept, you stick that landing.
And I think what's important, for that is it is gradual. Like you say, the ball is a huge distraction when we talk about quality of movement, and I think coaches can use that as a bit of education for them, so they're exploring what great movement looks like, and then when they're asking their athletes, players to do it, they know what good quality movement looks like, and then they can reinforce like, oh, actually, and I guess what we're talking about is if I'm doing like a single leg hop and jump, we wouldn't expect my knee to be going woof, 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 like this, would we? It would be like a good solid kind of landing, no little movement to the side, no wobbles and stuff. Because then when you think about that, adding the ball into that, for me, catching the ball and stuff, is further going to like stress that to then when I go in a game and that's going to be contested, that's so important. I feel like I'm able to be in control of that good quality movement, which I don't do. Jump, hope. Don't follow me. I guess one of the other things that I'm thinking about as well is, if we're talking about foundation, so I think jump high, land strong is, it's clear, like you mentioned, we've had to put in, it's almost like a little intervention, right? So we recognise that there's been some issues with it in the past. It's like a really good resource. But I'd also like to think that if we could describe some of the stuff that you alluded to before, and we could encourage young players to be like really active, there's some good stuff that we could do as well. So like I think about like young players playing like multi-directional games like tag and chase, cat and mouse, fox and hound, whatever you want to call it. Those games are really great for dodge, weave, multi-direction, changes of direction. Yeah, lots of people around, lots of like eyes up, that kind of stuff. Is there anything else that you think is really good, kind of like just stuff or things that you've seen that might work really well, that are fun as well?
Yeah, I think there's some real success in young kids and athletes doing almost like obstacle courses. And again, that's probably because it does bring in that jump and land challenge. But we shouldn't really be teaching anyone to run fast or to change direction fast if we haven't taught them how to stop, first and foremost. So that's where the landing mechanics do come in. But again, exposure to jumping over things, landing one leg versus two legs from different heights, from different speeds, practicing things, races in which do have different decel distances or hard stops, and the hard stops in particular for netball, definitely, are all just going to be great. And the more it's like play, the more engagement you're going to get, and the more variety of movement that your body's going to learn to cope with.
Yeah, I think that's so important that you share that, because when I was coaching, we get taught kind of the importance of warming up and stuff like that. And I remember like when we went through this phase of like SAQ, that kind of stuff, like all the ladders and whatnot. But no one ever said to me, Sarah, it's really important that when you're coaching players, you tell them how to stop. It never even entered my brain. I just thought, well, they'll probably work that out. But I never really thought about that and the importance of kind of like being able to do that, to turn, to twist, to kind of think about, I want to go that way.
I think it's a skill that is demanded really highly in netball and not so much in football, rugby, even tennis. And so like they slide through a movement. Yes, they practice their changes of directions, but netball requires a dead stop from whatever speed you're traveling at. You got to stop because of footwork. Obviously you can run through if you get your timing of your pass right, but you are definitely going to have to come to a dead stop and decel really hard. So, but you're right, it's not really taught. We don't really teach people how to stop.
Okay, so what we want then is we want people commenting on this video of all their good kind of changes of direction games, activities that they can do, games that encourage people to stop. Let's see your best advice for helping young players getting back into netball, how to stop and start effectively. And then I guess that jump high, land strong, like I think they're printable cards, right? So people can go on and print them off like a sheet.
Yeah, so they're on the development framework website, the Roses, for England Netball at the moment, and they are poster designs. So each stage has its own sort of poster, which you can either obviously just have up on your phone, you can print off if you wanted to, and there's a scorecard. So when I'm talking about checking your movement quality, you can compare it to the visuals that we've given of good examples and the less wanted examples. So it makes it really easy to be able to track your progress and move through to the next stage.
Yeah. And how many stages do we have right now?
So we've got 3 stages right now. The intention is for there to be 5 to work up through to high level netball skills. So 15 weeks worth at the moment, up to 25, if I can steal some time with the coaches to really make it specific.
Yeah, so when we don't have players on the bench, Snowy can do some more work on jump high, land strong, everyone. No, so that's really cool. And I think what's good about that is, like, I think it's important to have like the ability to be able to recognize like what good looks like in any coaching form. Like if we're teaching, I don't know, centre pass attack, having a reference point for what good is important. So it's nice that there are some like visuals on there for like good movement and not so good. Did you say, are they on there?
Yeah, so it's we're asking you to look at, I think it's 4 or 5 areas of the body as the person lands, and it's ultimately you want to score as low as you can. So each time you see something that's marked as less desirable, it gets 1 point, and the idea is that you score in 0 or like 1 or 2. And I think it's the repetition of that. You're not going to be perfect all the time. If you have a bit of a wobbly landing, you have a bit of a wobbly landing. But if you have a wobbly landing every time and you're always scoring 4 or 5, you need to really practice that skill before you move on, or you might even have to go back to the one before to get good, ready for the progression.
And I think, do you think this is something that people can do all the time? I'm thinking that there'll be some situations now, like I know, like NPL has just finished. The counties and stuff will be going into trial period soon, and then their activity will be starting. We'll go through a little like pre-season, if you like. Is this something that you would suggest is only relevant there in pre-season, or do you think it's something that people can do all the time?
No, you can do it all the time. The minimum is twice a week if you are doing it, and that is to evoke change. If you're doing it only once a week, the likelihood is you're not going to see carryover or change in your movement mechanics. There's no reason why you couldn't do it more than twice a week if you wanted to. And it is probably a good little touch point with some of that impact work. So if you have had a off season or a period of rest, or you've not done something for a while, it's probably a good way to ease yourself back into some of that impact, particularly on those harder surfaces. It can be done all year round. It doesn't have to be a specific pre-season thing. It doesn't have to be as part of injury return, but it fits in all of those categories as well.
I haven't played netball for a few weeks. Maybe I should.
So you should.
I should do it.
The egg.
Just do it. Level 1 poster A. Yeah, no. I think that's perfect. I think it's just about and coaches kind of engaging with it. And what I was thinking of in my head. So one of the things that we talked about a lot when I was working with a group of other coaches, like some of the challenges that they was talking to me about was, like when you turn up to a session. And maybe your session is 7 till 8, right? But there's a session on before, and you can't get on to the court or whatever, and probably until 7, because the team before is maximising their hour, and you need to maximise theirs. Or you might be able to get on your facility, but there's always that drab of players just coming in at different times. So we used to talk about like startup activities or things that the players could do by themselves. So what's in my head is like, if it was me, I think I'd print them out. If we were waiting to get on the court, like I don't suppose this demands a lot of space, does it? So we could be like in that little corridor, like we could be in the changing rooms, practicing some of those movements together. or if you're waiting for all 14 players to arrive to a session or whatever, we could be practicing this before we kind of start any other formal warm-up or practices. So I think they're just nice little initial startups that could form a habit of good practice if you get that right.
Yeah, definitely. And as I said, it's low on kit. It's your body and a ball, essentially. Occasionally, we are asking you to throw a ball against the wall, but if you've got partners and teammates around, there's no reason why you couldn't use them. And I think it's really good as well to get a bit of a better awareness of self. So, like I say, use a video, or if you're doing it at home in front of a mirror, then you can see how you feel like you're moving and how well you control it. And then comparing that to actually what your peers and your teammates say. I think it could be really interesting for some people.
I told you to hold prehab earlier, and this might come into this little bit. So I'm just wondering about any little top tips for coaches around supporting physical development. So kind of what do you think, and maybe if there's any specific for different areas of the pathway, so like the youngsters or whatever, but I don't know, if they're generic, then that's also fine. But just, is there anything that you think, I think it would be important for coaches to be thinking about these things?
I think it's important for coaches to encourage, like you say, those little pre-activities, but we call it activation. So I think a lot of people will see our girls come out on court and do the formal warm-up, but there's stuff going on in the changing rooms and corridors, back of house before that. And when we have sessions in training camps, we do activations and individualized prep in their activation.
Usual two-step with the band.
Yeah, I mean, it's also quite high chat, but the idea is that people are doing the things that they need to do as an individual to get their body best ready for the warm-up, which is then to get them ready for the session. So I think if coaches can encourage athletes to better prepare for physical activity, then that's a great start. If they want to have a little set prep session, that's also better than doing nothing, rather than individualizing. It doesn't need to be a high demand task that people have to go and try and assess everything and work out, what someone's got to work on. I think practicing balance, practicing things that take your joints through their ranges of movement, so your squats and your lunges with good form and consistency across the week, probably is just a good way to get people into some good movement habits, as well as warming up the body for a session when they're about to run around for 2 hours and maximize every minute on court like the people that are on there before them.
Yeah, I think the mistake that we can make is focusing on just the part which is about like warming up and getting ready, that like cardio aspect, if you like, and forgetting about good form. So I think if we can really think about good physical development, injury prevention, the root of that is good form, right? So I think making sure that we go slow and steady with that while we're building good form before we kind of racing through to do anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like starting your car in the winter, isn't it? Sometimes you just got to turn the engine over and let it warm up a little bit before you get going.
I don't know. I don't have an old car now. These things just work like magic, don't they?
That narrative isn't helpful.
Yeah, I think that kind of like running is just not the answer. We've talked with coaches before about like game relevance, and I think like in terms of like coaching tactical or technical like game problems, and I think we can say the same for like physical development. So if we think about what's relevant to the game and we take a snapshot, what does the game serve like to the athletes? It's speed, it's jump, it's land, it's changes of direction. Therefore, like our sessions will need to maximize that, replicate that in order for us to continue to build on that. But if we're not quite there yet, good form is our best friend, and like being slow and steady with that good form will help us to then start to kind of be able to replicate that with more intensity, with more contest.
Yeah, absolutely. Good form, range, challenge your range, take your joints through ranges, start to think about strengthening, and then movement agility.
Yeah. And on the England Netball website, as well as the Jump Highland Strong, there's also some information about kind of like that physical pillow, some kind of like what good physical movement and development looks like. There's also some information on there about what a great warm up looks like, which is also, I guess, some good information to explore. You did a really good shout out to Netball Her earlier, but I'm just going to reinforce that. I don't know. Have you checked it out? Yeah. Okay. Is it like I'm just no? So question one, no. I'm just going to kind of whiz through some things, but if there's anything I miss, then I think on that website there's some really good resources. We talked earlier about like female sport. Maybe we could all do with a little bit of education about maximizing that space for good athlete development for females. There's some stuff on there around avoiding injuries. And I think what's really great is there's some specific information about injuries across the lifespan of females. So puberty, pregnancy, postnatal, menopause, and which I think are life moments in life that we are really pertinent to kind of like what our physical like the impact of mobility, fitness, and things that you've described, that are worth paying attention to in order to maximize that physical development so that we can keep athletes strong.
Definitely.
And performing. Have I missed anything?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just that it's a good platform for women to learn a bit more about themselves. Like sport's a great gateway for information and change, and I think this is netball's gateway to really support the women that play our sport. So I think there's huge amounts of information in there that apply to everyone, not just if you've ever picked up a netball or not.
Yeah, true. Game changers, netball. That is the end of my questions. Yes. Level 5. I thanks so much for kind of sharing that. I think often we can kind of stay with the technical and tactical stuff, and we probably don't integrate some of the other parts of the on court, because this is still on court in my eyes. Often we're asking club coaches to perform many roles, which one of like S&C physio is included in that. They're wearing many hats. So I think it's important to think about how we can upskill, bring more awareness to those roles. So thank you for doing that. And hopefully like coaches have taken something from that and also know where to look for more information. So thank you.